Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Moving into the Future. Today, I'm joined by Hector Kolonas from Syncaroo. Syncaroo helps operators sync data between platforms so that individuals, companies, and brokers can easily locate and book flexible and co-working spaces through a variety of channels. It's designed to automate repetitive workflows and expand revenue opportunities for co-working spaces by keeping a growing number of platforms up to date with accurate information on available spaces, pricing, and live availability. Hector, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me, and excited to dive in and see where we get in this conversation.
Yeah, because it really is interesting, what Syncaroo does. I came across it on LinkedIn and I came across your profile and I was really, engaged and interested in it because considering the nature of the market today and the way that, not only co-working has evolved in the last couple of years due to the pandemic, but even prior to that, it really is such an interesting submarket of the commercial real estate landscape. And, that's really what I wanted to ask at first. What did you see in the co-working industry that inspired you to create Syncaroo?
Great question. And I think you hit it right on the head. Things are changing really, really quickly. But for folks who've been working in the industry, we've always kind of seen a future where anybody would be able to access space that helps them do their best work in the environment or neighborhood or area that motivates them or inspires them the most. So that's kind of where we've always been building towards as co-working spaces, as brands, as the industry. But about 7 to 8 years ago, I launched a company that built membership, member benefits and perks programs for co-working spaces. And while growing that out across the world, I spoke to community managers all over the place, and they would love the fact that there was so much tech available, so many solutions that could improve their onboarding, improve their sales, their leads, get them more people through the door, but none of them talk to each other. So they were spending a lot of time having to do very repetitive tasks. And because I was always in these spaces and I'm kind of like a workspace geek, I heard a lot of these complaints. And then in 2019, I wrote a blog post saying that it's ridiculous that this still is a problem. And if anyone wants to work on it with me, to reach out. Had a few conversations with people around the world and ended up co-founding a company now called Syncaroo with my co-founder, Robert Krupp. And we started building this technology to automatically keep all of the technologies and services and solutions in sync with each other.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, because I have spent a lot of time in the co-working sector as well. You really do see the entire ecosystem at work, and with such a, diverse and dynamic group of different people working within it, to have something that is centralized and automated and, really reliable, it is such a key component. And the other aspect of that on top of it is not only is the ecosystem of the co-working space so unique, but also the cities that they're in are so, diverse and different from other cities, throughout the world and across the world. What are some things in different markets that you're seeing that's really unique, either based on the geography or the socioeconomic specifics of that area that, Syncaroo has kind of helped you see, and then it have helped different, companies, brokers, co-working spaces in those markets access and see?
Yeah, so I think it actually goes to something that's far bigger answer than the question you asked. And that is, I truly believe that the way that the next 5 million people who will use co-working spaces will find and access and then join other spaces hasn't been built yet. There hasn't been a unified way for people to build creative new ways to engage with physical space. Everyone had to start from square one, get a whole bunch of inventory onto their system, and then build from there. What happens if you remove that step one, allow people to really quickly onboard and partner with spaces, but then instead focus on the experience? And the reason why I bring that up is going to the different cultural, the different ways people are using space also reflects on how they're accessing that space. So if we look at places like India, South Africa, South America, the ways that they're using space or shared space or flex space is for a completely different purpose. Most times it's somewhere safe to work, somewhere that there's good Wi-Fi, somewhere there's electricity. Um, Here in New York or in Jersey City, we don't have to worry about there not being electricity, but we want community, we want business networking, we want something. So these pieces all exist, but what is highlighted in each culture or each hyperlocal economy is different. And that obviously allows for different kinds of distribution channels, different types of brokerages, different types of apps. If you, for example, are filling space in a cash-based economy, it doesn't matter if you have the best credit card processing in your app because that's not how people book space. So because of that, and because of the fact that there's so many different groups of people now discovering space, and that's just looking at people who are paying for their own desk. Let's not forget that the GSA has just signed a 5 partner deal to bring 2 million government or federal employees into flex spaces, or at least give them the option of flex spaces. In Ireland, they're investing in an entire network of remote hubs for their employees to work from as well. So we're seeing these different groups of people who either never had to book space or are now being given this choice for the first time, will have completely different needs. They'll have completely different objectives for why they want to access a flex space. And that just opens up so many more questions than gives us answers.
Yeah, it really does too. And, when you talk about getting the government involved in it, that really brings an interesting proponent because, then what you start to do is essentially centralize, co-working and again, like the centralizing, accessing that space, where decentralized, spaces and, those markets can still certainly exist. But, having both of those proponents existing is really interesting. And like beyond that, when you say prior to that about, the next 5 million people who access space, we're going to be doing it differently. And, that really does beg the question, how do you see it happening? Like there's so many ways. Do you think it's going to be like, in different markets where it'll simply be like going to a coffee shop and ordering a coffee shop and people will show up, and again, like you mentioned, it's safe. They have Wi-Fi, they have electric, and they simply show up and they say, I'd like a space for the day. And they, almost like an internet cafe back in the day. Do you see that happening in different markets, to be as simple as that? Or do you see it in a different way where, again, like there could be some government incentives where, you're given a pay pass card from the government that allows you to access a space, based on the type of work you're doing, or different components and variables like that. What are your thoughts on that?
So two great questions. One is, will people like the government using co-working centralize access between sort of specific companies, or more for lean towards a decentralized model of putting employees in a network of unaffiliated spaces. I think what's most interesting about at least the GSA deal is they awarded their contract to 5 companies, 2 of which are networks of independent operators and 3 of which are fully owned networks of space. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch that over the next couple of years and see where federal employees choose to work, where they feel most comfortable, what they have the most seamless experience with. So that's going to be really interesting to watch on that, the whole question around whether it's going to be a centralized booking or it's going to be kind of decentralized between through one app or multiple apps and 2 independent operators across the network across the country. As for how I see people accessing space, right? It does go back to the previous question about the different cultural ways that we engage with things. If you're in a world where people order their food from Amazon or some food delivery app, they book taxis on their phone, everything's kind of instant gratification. Of course, they're going to get to a point, they're going to be leading into being able to access a space, walking into a space without having to sign a contract, get a membership, get onboarded. They just want to walk in, put their laptop down, and know that the amenities are there, sort of like a network of membership clubs, if you will. Uh, that's the one way. In other countries, people want that security. They want to know that if they're going to leave their laptop on a desk, that everyone else who's there has been vetted. Um, there are indie spaces which are strictly for specific types of businesses, whether it's high growth e-commerce companies or co-working spaces just for lawyers or co-working spaces for physicians. It's each one is going to have slightly different criteria, and depending on their local economy, they're going to have different ways of how they want people to engage with their space. But I definitely think we're leaning towards a future where you could arrange a meeting just like you share a Zoom link or a Vimeo link or whatever it is that you share to have a virtual conference. You will be able to select an office or a meeting room that you will join. We're seeing integrations into Slack for teams to do huddles in physical spaces. We're seeing integrations into Microsoft Teams. So all these things are happening, and the only way that they can happen is by focusing on not where the puck is today, but where it's going to be 3 years from now.
Right. And again, that's also an interesting question or an interesting proposition too, as far as sharing a link the same way we do now with Zoom, sharing a link almost like a geotag, if you will, of like, an apparent or excuse me, an available meeting room or, conference room or whatever it may be that the group needs at that time. Is that where Syncaroo can really help because of their data and the way that they automate that data, knowing that there is that room available, at this time and it's live and up to date? It's not going to be a situation where they get there and it's already taken or, for any reason it doesn't exist at all. Like, that's Syncaroo's main purpose, is to make sure that when we do get to that day, as we were talking about, it is it's accurate data up to the moment. That's what you guys are really aiming to do, right?
Exactly. I mean, the main differentiator from when you nailed it perfectly. The only thing I would sort of asterisk there is that we don't want to handle the front end. The way the person finds books,
Right.
processes the space, that is not really what Syncaroo does. But everything else you said, making sure that regardless of what platform, regardless of whether it's in a Google Calendar or in a Zoom link or in a Slack channel or in any of the array of apps that already exist, making sure that there isn't double bookings, making sure that
Right.
the space is available and can take that booking, making sure that it's held and that when you arrive in any space, you're a first class citizen. You're not, arriving there and they don't care that much because you came from some other app where they make less money. Like there's a bunch of things that have to get fixed. And we're hoping that by building the tech layer to enable everyone to connect with the space seamlessly, we can get to that future that we envision.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. And again, we've had the discussion too now. We've kind of taken co-working and flex space globally. We're not so focused specifically during this conversation, to just siphon it through the lens of an American. And with that thought in mind, what markets internationally do you think the rise of co-working is really going to positively affect the most? Do you think it's going to be those, Indian countries or regions where, there's still a lot of value in businesses and collaboration. However, the foundation isn't necessarily there so much, or do you see it more data in other markets that's kind of really sparked your interest in the amount of growth that could potentially happen there?
I mean, I got into co-working back in 2013 in the middle of a economic collapse where all the banks froze, and we saw people joining these spaces when they were made suddenly unemployed on a Friday. And by Wednesday, they were building new businesses, building new collaborations, and getting back on their feet. And that was because of the space, because of the community, because of the ability to get away from the questions and the concerns at home and being able to focus on work. Now, I do write a weekly newsletter about everything that's happening in co-working. And a big part of that is looking at the global trends. Just in the last few weeks, we've seen huge surge in the number of spaces being opened in second and third tier cities across India. We're seeing huge suburban plays being made across suburban America. So even though the markets are so different, the needs for a space that isn't home but isn't a 3 hour commute is critical. It's becoming a human need to have a space to go and work at, if not every day, but somewhere that isn't home, a third space, if you will. Uh, but I think it's going to have the biggest impact outside of the city centers, in the suburban markets, in rural. I mean, there was a book that was released this week about the impact of rural co-working across Europe. And they looked at what does it mean for those towns? What does it mean for those societies to have somewhere to work, but also to attract more workers, to reduce the brain drain. So I think it's gonna have a huge impact on their hyperlocal communities, especially outside of the central business districts.
Right. And I think I saw it in your newsletter this week, specifically Tulsa in Oklahoma, where they started that program, I believe, at the beginning of the pandemic or very close to it. And it's generated, was it like $62 million in revenue, for that city, which is significant for a, smaller
Yeah.
city like that. That is a very interesting, first of all, the entire study and, proposal was interesting when it started. And now that they've gotten this data and they've seen it, it's even more interesting to see that it worked. And you could imagine a lot of cities, especially in rural America, where they're referred to as flyover states, can use that study as an opportunity to bring new people into those markets. And you would have to imagine that co-working and flexible office space is going to be a huge variable, to making it sustainable and also growing. That was one of the great things about WeWork in its early days is you had these companies starting in WeWork and they grow into these, massive, some unicorn companies. So yeah, it's really, really fascinating. Do you know of any specific co-working companies, in Tulsa, like not named WeWork or, any of the ones that we may know, or for that matter, in any secondary markets that, you've really found to be interesting and most valuable to that type of market?
I mean, I'm a huge fan of the independent operators. I'm a
Me
huge
too.
fan of the people who are born and bred, and they created community. They created space for their community. I'm blown away by what Spark is doing in Baltimore and in a few other cities. I'm blown away by Alkaloid out in Atlanta. Um, what are they called? In New Mexico. What was the name of the Manhattan Project? That thing, Project X, Project Y in New Mexico. Like all these really small spaces, really focused on serving their immediate community and creating value there first, and then expanding out. And of course, you've got other chains. You've got Serendipity Labs. You've got Venture X. You've got
Yep.
all these new franchisee plays coming in. You've got Common Death out in Dallas in Texas and the Midwest, I think. You've got really interesting things happening as these kind of spaces look to either expand, but expand in a more sustainable, holistic way, looking for communities that are really needing the human elements of co-working as opposed to just workspace.
Right. And like looking at it as a, major profit opportunity and more so as a community-based opportunity to help people, grow within their professions and expertises. So yeah, I am also very, focused and hopeful for those type of co-working and flexible spaces too. Again, this brings us back to the decentralized aspect of these. I think it's so important for, not only small businesses as a whole, but, young and old entrepreneurs alike. Again, when you can build these communities around like-minded people who they wouldn't be like-minded if they weren't there, right? So, to have those local resources available, again, just as a alternate solution to the large players that we work, I compare it to coffee shops. You're going to have Starbucks on every corner, but it's also nice to have, the mom and pop espresso shop or, something like that. I think of co-working extremely similar in that regard. And again, now to loop it, into Syncaroo, how is it that you're seeing, especially in these local markets, or even not, even in some larger cities, not so much like the New Yorks, the San Franciscos, the LAs, but how brokers and co-working spaces, how brokers are better utilizing co-working space opportunities, based on the data available to them. I could imagine in the last 5 years, especially, it's become, so much more of a tool for them. How has, Syncaroo helped the technologies better prepare them and find the right solutions, for their clients?
Great. So, I mean, I think we have to mention the elephant in the room, and that is that if a brokerage is providing solutions for a company now and it doesn't include remote options or hybrid options, which include flex workspace, work near home, hub and spoke, all the terminology that was made really popular last year. Um, the companies are looking elsewhere. The brokers and the brokerages have to offer solutions that accommodate both the HQ model and the fact that increasingly companies are looking to see how they can hire from anywhere. How can they be fully or partially remote? How can they be hybrid? How can they save money on real estate and instead give perks and better healthcare and other benefits to employees in this new global competition for talent? So the brokers really need to know what's available, who's selling it, what the deals are, who it's perfect for. And up until now, or until very recently, a lot of that, I'm sure when you were launching in new cities, you would have to create an Excel sheet or a PDF and send that to a broker. And then every time, either every week or every month, you would then have to send an updated bro thing, or someone would call and be like, hey, is that room still available? We have a member of a team of 30 people, 20 people. Um, and what we've been helping a bunch of brokers do is remove that whole question and answer email chain. Uh, Log straight into a system that shows you exactly what's available, what the pricing is, what's becoming available in the next couple of months, and make recommendations to clients without having to add that extra man hours or woman hours or person hours into preparing a quote. And if we can make it all more efficient for the brokers, we're going to put more people in Flex, and we're going to keep companies happier as they shift their focus from how do we build a hybrid company to how do we attract the best talent from anywhere in the world.
Right, right. And that is so important. And as a matter of fact, that's a conversation I had with my last guest, who is a small business owner on Long Island. And, she is now competing with New York City, for talent, but it's also vice versa. Because of hybrid and remote work, she's able to also, attract New York City talent to Long Island now, because they can work remote or hybrid and stuff like that. But now, see, the fascinating aspect of that is too, you can position it with co-working to say, well, the broker can be asking, what do you want out of co-working space? Do you want it to be, strictly business where it's, just that desk? Do you want it to be more of like a wellness platform where there might be some perks in there that allow for, whatever, meditation, exercise? It could be any number of things, So the fact that Syncaroo is doing that and, providing that technology and automation to these variety of search engine technologies is so key and so relevant. And then, I definitely want to get into, how we're seeing now technology really changing the workflow in the flex space. And, you said this at the beginning where, and again, I saw this firsthand when I was at WeWork, whether it's like the building management system or the variety of perks that we have for members, or just like simply booking a conference room. Like all of this stuff is done on different technologies. So one of the keys to co-working and flex, really in this next evolution, I would really consider this like probably phase 3 of flex and co-working office space. How do we see technology changing the workflow of flex office space, and how people use it and simplify it for themselves and their companies?
Yeah, so I think it all kind of steps back to how the how the space thinks about technology. For the last year or so, I've been telling spaces about this shift that's happening from a tech stack to what I like to call an operational stack, where instead of just thinking about which piece of technology solves this piece of the puzzle the best, actually looking at what are the workflows, what are the user journeys that someone will go through if they booked, for example, a space on Upflex and they had a meeting room, but then they wanted to order lunch and then they wanted to sign up for a membership. Well, what is that entire journey and which technology pieces do they touch? Um, and then how do you automate the pieces of that so that as a customer, they have a fluid experience, a seamless experience, regardless of how they interact with your space. We're definitely seeing that. We're seeing a huge explosion in the number of tech available. And I say that because I think for a very long time, there was a few very large monolithic options, right? You get one solution from one company and they have every piece of the puzzle kind of stuck together. Um, and what we're seeing is because of this huge explosion in investment, but also in availability and options, operators are instead picking the best solution for each piece and then looking to glue them together into that cohesive, seamless experience. And that's a shift that we started seeing a couple of years ago. It's definitely picking up now. And it's why you're seeing such huge investments and a lot of merger and acquisition activity in the sort of workspace tech or CRE tech sector.
Right. And like, so, one that comes to mind immediately for me, and, like, correct me if I'm wrong, is like Office R&D. Like, that's a technology that's really been developed specifically for co-working. And, as far as I understand it, to help with like the space utilization, space occupancy, things of that nature. Now, on top of that, would they be using other technologies, to complement that? Or, is that more so of like the tech stack as opposed to the operational stack? Can you explain that a little bit better? Am I on the right track with
Yeah,
saying that?
sure. Yeah, definitely. So Office R&D is very, very focused on how best they can integrate with other best-in-class solutions. And I say that because Office R&D is integrated with Syncaroo, so I know it firsthand. I can say that on the record. Um, they are very, very focused on allowing operators to run their business as efficiently and as uh, optimized or to optimize as much as possible. They're releasing business intelligence tools now. They're really focused on how do we the data we're getting back, how do we make it more useful so that operators can make data-driven decisions. But you're not going to see a company like Office R&D build sensors and access control systems and uh, Wi-Fi routers and booking apps. Those things can all be developed by one or more other parties.
Right.
And by thinking of it as an operational stack, you have to think about all those different pieces. The light sensors, the Wi-Fi provisioning, the screens in the meeting room. All of those need to be connected to this central hub. Now, in the operational stack, you have this onion type approach of in the middle, you have hospitality. What do your existing customers and their guests interact with on a daily basis? Outside of that, you have this layer called sales, where you're converting people into members, and then you have lead generation, and then outside that, marketing. So the whole idea of the operational stack is how do you efficiently build systems where you're pulling in as many amazing people into the middle of the onion or into the middle of the graph and keeping them there happy and healthy. And that is what the difference is instead of thinking of purely how do we implement technology to solve a technical roadblock or get over a hurdle, to instead thinking about how do you design your processes, your workflows, and your integrations so that as people come into your space and become part of your community, you can serve them better.
Right. And I think it's so important. I just want to emphasize it that you put hospitality in the middle of that because that is essentially the key for any co-working, flexible office space that when members do go there, they feel comfortable, they feel safe, they feel productive, they feel a part of it, of that hospitality, and then growing it out from there is so important. So then as far as the operational stack goes again too, like what else comes to mind? And again, you clearly know it better than I do. I'm very new to this idea. Would you say again it's more of a dashboard situation and flow like that, or like you're logging into an app and like it is the app going to be it's a co-working app where you log into that there, and that app is essentially your one-stop shop. That's really what you're trying to make it, where all of that data, or excuse me, all of those services lie there, with the foundation being the hospitality that this co-working space has to offer. Is that correct?
It's That's a piece of it, right? So inside the hospitality layer, you have to think about everything that a human would touch to go into
Right.
the space. So the tenant experience, so things like Lane, things like uh, the Office R&D member portal and the Nexus member portal, they will be a piece of it. Well, how the user engages and books meeting room within the space is one piece of it. The rest is when they get to the physical space, how are they accessing? How are they opening doors?
Right.
How are they getting Wi-Fi connected to a new device? Is there security provisioning around, the alarm systems? We saw, an experience with Phil, also ex WeWork, I believe, who tried to book a meeting room for an early morning call, got there, and he had been given all the pieces of the puzzle except for the code to switch off the alarm. So he arrived in a space, walked in, tried to sit down to set up his laptop, and the alarm went off.
Right.
And because that piece wasn't included in the onboarding or whatever happened, someone wasn't there on time, these things do happen. If you had taken a operational stack approach, you would have seen all the pieces that need to be in sync so that someone can do that use case. So it doesn't help just to have a dashboard for the user or a dashboard for the admin, but it's thinking about how the different pieces come together to give that cohesive experience.
Yeah, that's really fascinating and really innovative. It begs the question of like AI and like their integration into co-working and workspace, because that level of specificness and attention to detail, as you mentioned with that example with the security, is there's so much integration in technology and just synergy that needs to take place in order for that to work. So that's a really fascinating proposition. And it's certainly where we're going. It's where we have to get to with, this co-working and flex space to take it to the next level. And again, just like they always mention this, in the real estate crash of '08, in the United States, one of the reasons why WeWork was able to, really grow and expand, and not just WeWork, other, co-working companies as well, was because it offered those short-term leases and, flexible, spaces and leases that allowed for this new dynamic in the market. And, that was more of a physical, solution that they had. Now it's much more of a people, and how people work and where they want to work and as we were saying, how people, hire and where we're attracting the best talent. And that's the next step is that operational stack and making sure just the integration process is seamless to the point of really no thought. It should flow like, the same way Syncaroo does. I guess that's a good analogy there. But
Exactly.
Hector, yeah,
And
heck, go ahead.
I was going to say that brings us back to kind of the first point we discussed, right? The next 5 million people, the way they engage with space, the way they feel shared space, it just hasn't been created yet. And our hope is to build the data infrastructure that lets the next generation of innovators build AI, blockchain, Web3, Web5, whatever it is, technology on top of the physical space.
Yeah, that's a really exciting look ahead, and I think that's a good preview into what could be next for not only Syncaroo, but also the Moving into the Future podcast, when hopefully we get to have you on again in the future, and we can talk about, we can look back on this and talk about what we made happen. So Hector, I really appreciate you coming on. It was a great conversation. Looking forward to following
Likewise.
Syncaroo, and hopefully we can do this again someday.
Sounds great. Hopefully, we can meet in the middle and do it in person as well and share a coffee or a beer. Um, Thanks for having me on, and I look forward to coming back and seeing how right or wrong we were with our predictions.
Yes, absolutely, and enjoy. And I'll take you up on that coffee or beer for sure. We'll talk soon. All right, Hector.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks again,
Thank you.
everybody, for listening. Looking forward to the next episode. Bye.